Welcome to your Daily Dose of Theological German. We are on installment number 2, looking at an excerpt from a Karl Barth work here, The Teaching of the Word of God, Prolegomena to Church Dogmatics. Okay, so we're only 2 sentences in, and already Barth is going to show us a thing or two about a frustrating sentence in German. This one's actually pretty straightforward once you figure out what it says. It doesn't say anything all that complicated, but it's just kind of convoluted. And part of it is just Barth's style. It's not like this is some characteristic of German. I think if you read a translation of Barth, even a good translation, in English, you'll find it equally difficult to totally apprehend all the time because he kind of interrupts himself and he adds a lot of flourishes and things. Anyway, you'll see here. So es gibt, that's simple enough. That's your basic expression, like there is nothing prior. Then you have one word offset by commas, which is kind of appositional, preceding. So there's nothing prior, preceding. You could throw an or in there if you wanted to, although there's not one here in German, but you could say prior or preceding. But these are just two kind of equal terms, getting at the same idea. Nothing prior, preceding, that the person, or you might want to say a person in English, because we do it usually with an indefinite article in this type of context, that a person as a Christian, and now, Barth's going to interrupt himself, or in order to become, there's a nice direct use of werden as a verb, as a main verb, in order to become a Christian. And now you have a subordinate clause, and so your verbs are going to be down at the end, or your verb is going to be down at the end, except there's two of them conjoined here by oder, and so these are your two verbs. So this is what makes this clause kind of difficult, is that, well, to begin with, to have two verbs in a clause, you can do that. Even in English, you can do that, but it's not very common. Usually you have one verb, but there's two conjugated verbs in this clause. And then to complicate matters further, both of these verbs are modals. And with a modal, you then have to have an infinitive verb to complement it. And so you have two infinitive verbs here as well, which are also kind of like of equal status in the clause. And so you kind of have this double expression, and so that's fine. But first, let's deal with these modals. The one thing to notice is that, let me just grab a different color here. They are subjunctives. And one way to spot a subjunctive, especially when you're dealing with modal verbs, if you see an ending that looks like it should be a past tense for the third person, in this case, and yet the context doesn't really seem to make that right, like why is this past? Because in the context, you're usually in these kinds of academic discourses writing in present tense verbs. So why is there suddenly a past tense here? That should be one thing. But then also you've got a past tense, but it's not actually the past tense of these particular modal verbs, because you should not have an umlaut here in the case of a simple past for these modals. And so that should kind of tell you, I might be looking at a subjunctive. Usually there's some kind of a vowel shift, and then the ending gets changed accordingly. So modal verbs basically express things that could be the case but are not the case. They're used for imagining, wishing, saying what might be if something was the case. You'll see them often in kind of if-then statements. And in this case, I think it's just that Barth's basically saying, well, these things don't really exist. So he's saying what the things are that don't actually apply. And so because they don't actually exist, he's using modals to express them. So the way you're going to handle this in English is you're going to use, we have basically a set of modal auxiliaries that we use to express kind of subjunctive ideas. And so that's how we do the same sort of thing in English, except we just don't have subjunctive forms of verbs, but we use things like would, could, and should, which German doesn't really have those particular modal verbs, and so English has those to accomplish what German accomplishes with these subjunctive forms. So we'll just use some kind of expression like that in order to get to what we're trying to say. So just so we're clear where we are, there is nothing prior or preceding that a person as a Christian, or in order to become a Christian, now let's grab these verbs, would be able to, or would have to be or do beforehand. And that's my favorite part of the sentence. You know, Barth has already up here said preceding, prior, Okay, and then he gets down here and he has to just modify it a little bit more with an adverb beforehand. I think he really wants you to understand. Nothing comes before in the Christian life. Before what? Ah, yes, well, you should have watched yesterday's video where Barth said the Christian life begins with love. There is nothing prior to love. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you found that interesting and helpful. And, well, the sentences get more complicated from here, so stay tuned. Please like, subscribe, share.